We've got an international theme this year, so we thought we should have someone from Notre Dame International to tell us about how that organization advances the university's mission around the globe. And we also wanted somebody with extensive business experience. We are a college of business after all. And so Tom Guinan, our speaker today, is perhaps uniquely qualified to give us a talk. I'm not going to go too much into his background because that's going to be part of his presentation, but I see a lot of accounting majors out there, and I think it'll be interesting to you especially as he tells the story of how he went from accounting major at Notre Dame to Ernst & Young and back here to the Controller's Office and Notre Dame International. So with that, please join me in welcoming Tom.
Is this working well? Yes? Well, as Brian said, I'm Tom Guinan. I'm with Notre Dame International. I'm the Associate Vice President for Administrative Operations. And how many accounting majors do we actually have here? This has got to be part of the class assignment.
Thirst for knowledge.
Well, thanks for everyone for coming. We're going to talk a little bit, as Brian mentioned, about what I do, my background, how that relates to some of the ethical dilemmas that I face in my job on a fairly regular basis, but also ethical dilemmas that are relevant to the university as a whole. This won't be academically focused in the sense that I don't have real theories about ethics or how ethical dilemmas might best be resolved or how they're addressed or how they might arise, but I will share with you some of the things that are uniquely relevant or things that appear in the international context. And that's it's unique for Notre Dame because Notre Dame actually is a multinational corporation, if you will. It's got a lot of activity overseas, some structured activities, but also just some individual interactions that faculty members or staff have with people overseas. So I'll walk you through some of those experiences, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So my background. I was here at Notre Dame for a long time. I have a few degrees, and as Brian mentioned, I had an interesting path here. So when I asked about who was an accounting major, I was once just an accounting major, like many of you here. But I also had a double major that I finished a year after the accounting major, and took a little bit of a detour into the theology realm at the master's level. And interestingly enough, when I was the assistant director at Soren Hall during my master's program, I happened to take a Ernst & Young recruiter up the stairs to visit one of his hotshot seniors that he wanted to recruit. We got to talking a little bit about Ernst & Young and what they do and what my interests were. And he said, well, why don't you just come and interview? You know, I'm here for interviews. Why don't you come and talk to us? And one thing led to another. And I ended up going back home to, well, New York City. I grew up on Long Island, a fishing village at the time when I started working there. I was with Ernst & Young for 9 years. One of the unique things about my history with Ernst & Young is that I was actually hired into this healthcare not-for-profit business services group. And that was unusual because at the time, the big, I think it was the big six accounting firms would just hire general audit practitioners, and they would put them where they needed them. And most of the students from here and elsewhere wanted to go into financial services, retail, media. When I said I wanted to go into healthcare, and well, actually not-for-profit, they said, come on, we'll take you right away because we need people in that group. And so I ended up starting off in that group at the first year, and then the healthcare not-for-profit season is actually based on a June 30 fiscal year in most cases. So they said, you need to do some other things in your off season, so you'll be busy 18 months out of the year instead of just 12. So they assigned me to a lot of international law firms. And then does anyone know what LVMH stands for?
Louis Vuitton.
Louis Vuitton. So there's a big conglomerate, and I ended up auditing U.S. subsidiaries for Tag Heuer, the watch company, Thomas Pink, the shirt retailer, and eBell, which is a watch brand I don't see too much of these days. But that was part of my mix of activities at Ernst & Young. Now, one of the things that I recall, and some of the more seasoned people in the room might recall, is that back in the day when I started, the auditing firms were still allowed and actually encouraged to have very robust consulting practices. And so you had situations where audit partners were actually also partners on consulting engagements with their same client. And so that came to an end, I think, shortly after the Enron situation. But I had some firsthand visibility into what, even back then, I recognized as some considerable conflict of interest, definitely ethical dilemmas, if you will, or situations where something just didn't seem right. And just as an example, I was in a meeting with the audit partner and the audit team. I was the first year. We had the client representatives there, so the COO and the CFO. And this was a hospital situation where we were working on the audit, and the partner was also on a consulting arrangement to maximize sort of the recovery that the hospital would get from New York State in terms of Medicaid refunds and things like that, reimbursements. And the conversation went something like this. Well, this is the hospital client, in order for us to get funding for this major expansion of our facility, we need to demonstrate a certain level of financial performance. And the audit partner said, what do you want things to look like? And that then translated into what was shown on the financial statements, and it also impacted what was submitted to the state in terms of sort of this feasibility for a hospital expansion. I said, that doesn't seem quite right. And I think everyone in the room said, it doesn't seem quite right, and it turned out it wasn't quite right. And I think now we have much more, we had a clear separation now where audit firms are not to be involved in consulting arrangements for clients that they're auditing that could impact the actual financial statement presentation and sort of the integrity of their statement. So that was on the audit, on the healthcare side, but on the not-for-profit side, more relevant to even what I do today, I audited a company that was, or an organization that was involved in international rebuilding or rehabilitation of war-torn areas. And so this organization got lots and lots of funding from the USAID, and they had to use these resources to rebuild infrastructure, sewage systems, electrical grids, and things like that. And as an auditor, you go in there to their headquarters in New York and you say, okay, well, I see $5 million spent in Bosnia. Can you show me the supporting documentation? And the answer is, well, it's in Bosnia, and we don't really have receipts, and we don't have purchase orders, and we don't have all of this stuff. And the COO essentially said, look, this is a war zone. We don't get receipts. We transact in cash. We have to bribe. To get things done, we have to get things done the way the locals do it. And again, this poses a bit of an ethical dilemma, not only for me as an auditor, but also for the company management, because they know that we're not doing things as we would typically like to do them in the United States, or in terms of just what we think are our best practices from a financial control perspective. But we have to get the sewer system built, and we have to get the electrical grid back up. And so those things were interesting experiences in that realm. And I think that, as I mentioned, they're not atypical when you're working in certain areas of the world in terms of just dilemmas that you may face. So let's get into my professional history. So I was the associate controller from 2002 to 2012, hardcore accountant coming from the Big Four, at the time Big Four. I don't know if they actually replaced me after I left, so it was kind of a 10-year experiment in associate controllership. But it was great. I was responsible for accounts payable, payroll, financial reporting, purchasing, all the transactional aspects of the university. And I think just as sort of to set the stage in terms of what the university kind of looks like as a business, operating budget's around $1 billion a year, about $10 billion in assets, 5,000 employees, 10,000 people like you running around campus most of the year. So it's a big organization, and it's got a lot of characteristics of big organizations. And so that's that translates into what we do in terms of at Notre Dame International. But I think sometimes people don't have a full appreciation of what Notre Dame is like as a business. Many times they say, well, we've got a lot of buildings, and I hear about the endowment every now and again. But it's a big, big company. It's the largest employer in St. Joe County, and I believe in most of northern Indiana. So that's what Notre Dame looks like and what I kind of encountered as the associate controller. I'm now the Associate Vice President for Administrative Operations at NDI, and this position was created as an effort to sort of consolidate all of what Notre Dame does internationally. I'll get into that a little bit more. But there were already a lot of existing activities when I came on in 2012, but there were also some new initiatives that we wanted to just manage a bit more systematically and a bit more structure. So my main responsibilities, both here and for our operations overseas, are in the areas of financial management, international facilities, technology, risk management, and health and safety. And I have my colleague Susan Soyson back there, who is our lead person in that arena. Human resources, vendor contracts, really any of the operational aspects that are resonant in our core facilities, but also outside of those in terms of just places where we send students or faculty or have our relationships. So before I get into how Notre Dame International advances the university's mission, I thought it might just be helpful to share a little bit of background on the mission itself. And I think you may be familiar with these goals that are in support of the mission. But essentially, this is everywhere. If you go into any elevator lobby in Grace Hall, at least, you've got the little plastic laminated printouts that really just highlight for everyone what the university's goals are. Ensure its Catholic character, and I'll boil this down, Catholic character, undergraduate education, essentially research and scholarship, stewardship of resources, and then external sort of engagement and collaborations. And the two ones that I want to take advantage of for 23 months. Number 1 and number 4, I think, are particularly important to what I do as Notre Dame International. Number 1, ensure a Catholic character. I think that's it's tricky, I think, because when you ask everyone in this room, what does that mean? They'll probably give you as many different answers as there are people. A lot of times people will say, well, it means that we have dorms, chapels in every dorm, we have a Catholic faculty, we have masses 24 hours a day. And that's all true, and it's a very visible aspect of our Catholic character, but I think there's a little bit more, especially as it relates to just how you operate as a business. And then number 4 of all of these is the only goal that actually speaks to business as to how we operate as a business. Stewardship it means a lot of things, but in terms of business, it means stewardship. It means careful planning and utilization of resources. So I'll focus on those, but I did want to just share these with you. And I wanted to also then just give a little strictly Catholic perspective, because this, one of the things I also do, by the way, is teach religious education to our CIA candidates, if you will. Some people are thinking of becoming Catholic, and this is one of the areas that I teach, if you will, related to Catholic social teaching. So this is a real practical application of Catholic, if you will. And I just share this with you because when we look at the goals of the university, and one of the goals that says ensure that our Catholic character is reflected in everything we do, this is not a bad guideline, if you will, a set of guidelines to see what does that mean? How does that apply to what we do day to day? How do we operate as a business? Not all of these are relevant, but some of them are. If you specifically look at dignity of work and rights of workers, the life and dignity of the person, care for God's creation, they have relevance. And so I share that with you just to put it in a little bit of context in terms of what the Catholic aspect means in terms of working here at Notre Dame. So, ethical dilemmas. I had a couple of different titles for this slide because I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to present it. But ethical dilemmas, how do they arise? So they have, I think I tried to boil it down into a few characteristics that I've found in the day-to-day. An ethical dilemma will arise when something, again, this is not academic, Brian, so if there are 10 characteristics you could let me know. When somebody has proprietary knowledge, they have knowledge that is only available to them or to a limited group of people. And then they have the ability to either share it or to modify it or to withhold it. Local laws and customs. I think especially when you're talking about the international arena, the way things work in Italy and in, how many were here yesterday, by the way? Jeff really picked on Italy. He was going out, but he's right. Italy, Ireland, England, Israel, all places where we have significant presence. they do things differently. They do, legally, they do things differently, but also custom-wise or just what's acceptable or considered acceptable in those locations is different. And so you may find yourself saying, I'm comfortable doing things this way, but the laws over there say we have to do them that way. The Notre Dame goals, they are sort of a call to responsibility. I put standards in parentheses and quotes for extra emphasis, because Notre Dame is has very high expectations, and this, I say this as somebody on the inside, but many people within the organization and outside the organization expect Notre Dame to do things well, ethically, efficiently, stewardship in the broadest sense of the word. And it's true, that is the expectation from Father John to Tom Burge to John F. Briggs and all the way down to everyone in my department. There's an expectation that we do things well. That may come in conflict with doing things quickly or doing things circumventing certain rules and regulations, so it could create some dilemmas. And then lastly, the Catholic social teaching overlay, if you will, in terms of how that impacts how we make decisions, and if there's a final consideration, do we look towards that sort of guidance that is offered by teachings on, for instance, social justice, how we might say, this is the right thing to do in this circumstance. There's nothing compelling us to do it other than it's the right thing to do. Okay. So we have, we will encounter ethical dilemmas always in your professions that you choose, in my profession here, overseas, wherever. There is a framework that I just thought about in terms of how have we, in my organization, how have we responded, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we think about responding to ethical dilemmas as they arise. So that is not the way to respond to ethical dilemmas. I think what we'd like to, I'm assuming everyone knows Homer Simpson and Charlie Brown. And yes, anyone did not know what that pumpkin was about, and the puppy and the, okay. I have two of my children in the audience right now, so I'll be getting excellent feedback from them. I'm probably getting it right now. So, the response framework. I mentioned this yesterday. I had a loaded question in the audience yesterday with Jeff. The tone from the top is important. Management has to let employees know, and management even starting with Father John, that we're expected to respond in a certain way when ethical dilemmas arise. Broadly speaking, do the right thing, do what is right and not what is easiest. That has to be said at the top, it has to be reinforced, it has to be communicated, and the expectation should be made clear to everyone in the organization. The risk assessment concept is, again, something, for those of you aspiring auditors, you will become very familiar with the term, but you really also have to take formal stock of where you may be exposed. On the previous slide where I mentioned local laws and customs and other factors, doing a formal risk assessment to have a sense of where could we find ourselves in situations that may give rise to dilemmas, if you will. Not just dilemmas, but just generally risk assessments as an exercise are important, and this would be one component of the risk assessment. When will we find ourselves potentially in conflict from an ethical perspective? Related to the risk assessment are sensitivities, just being sensitive as a manager or as an employee, where we may run afoul of, in certain circumstances, cultures and cultural aspects of an individual working for us or dealing with vendors or things like that. So sensitivity is a soft skill or soft characteristic, if you will, but it is important when we're talking about semi-soft ethical dilemmas where there really isn't even a clear agreement that we actually have a dilemma. Sometimes someone will say, there is no dilemma, this is what we do, and others would say, no, not quite. I think we still need to consider a few more aspects of the situation. Transparency, and I'll keep these two together. So if we think about situations where an individual has what I refer to as proprietary knowledge, that individual has a responsibility, depending on the situation, to actually share that knowledge with, in most circumstances, those for whom they work, those with whom they work sideways, and in some cases, the people who may be working for them, just so that there's a very clear sense of, does everyone have the same sense of a particular issue? And I'm speaking in the abstract now, but I'll get into some more concrete examples in a minute. But these two aspects are, I think if you look back on when things didn't go well in terms of either major corporate issues or minor ones, these two aspects were lacking: transparency and then consultation. Somebody unilaterally decided to do something without consulting and then covered it up and made it look as if there were no issues, or there was tried to withhold visibility of how they acted. Supporting documentation, again, this is a favorite for auditors. Just if you make a decision, document it, email, paper file, keep a file of it somewhere, especially if it's a contentious issue. In some cases, legal counsel will insist that you document and retain, but it's important just to have a record of what you did and why. And then follow through and follow up. This is really just the sort of aspect of dealing with an ethical dilemma, that especially one that is not a situational dilemma, but it's sort of an ongoing organizational issue, that you maintain a particular posture with respect to the issue at hand. And so it's not just a one-off solution, but it's something where you say, okay, we're going to make sure that what we decided to do we're actually doing, and that we're doing it well, and that it's being communicated to people in different roles and as people transition through an organization. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Just in general, I'll take questions afterwards. But what I wanted to get into a little bit now is what Notre Dame International does. You can kind of see how those things that I spoke about relate to what we encounter fairly regularly. So, on our website, if you went out to Notre Dame International's website and looked at what we do, generally speaking, we outline 5 pillars, and these will be familiar to you in some ways, I'm sure. Education abroad is a big part of what we do, and that includes the study abroad. And for those of you who just found out about study abroad, you'll be familiar with that aspect of our program. Global Gateway Network is a new aspect of Notre Dame International that I'll get into a little bit. Internationalizing campus, so that's a part of what we do that's not really on the front of people's minds, that we're also charged with ensuring that this campus becomes more international and internationally aware. And then we support faculty collaborations and exchanges and institutional partnerships. So I'll get into a little bit now some specific ethical dilemmas without getting into too much detail, because some of them are actually still live, if you will. They're happening as we speak. But they're interesting for me and hopefully for you too. So, education abroad. The study abroad program that we manage, it's always oversubscribed. We love to award spots in our study abroad programs to every student who is qualified to go, but we simply don't have enough space or money to do that. So there's a selection process, and like any student selection process, everybody who has any interest in students will send you a note saying, I think you really need to consider this student or that student, or these 50 students, or something where individuals are effectively lobbying for students or groups of students. And this goes even to the level of departments saying we'd love to have more students from our departments go abroad. They all come to us in study abroad. And so there really is a dilemma that arises as to how do we fairly treat all the students without giving any students an unfair advantage because somebody lobbied on their behalf because of a benefactor or other interests that they have. So it's a challenge, and we've employed the framework that I described earlier, where no one makes a decision without consulting, and then if it's a decision that's made that may have ramifications that are uncomfortable, everyone knows about it, everyone has signed off on it, and we've just done our diligence, if you will. On a somewhat more mundane level, student visas and permits, one of the themes that you'll see through the ethical situations here in Notre Dame International is that a lot of stuff we can do internationally and just get away with because we either don't do it long enough or because we're not there in a particular place long enough that we can just kind of go in and do stuff and get out and say, it's not going to cause us. So student visas and permits is a good example. In just about every country where we have students, if students want to do anything other than be students, like if they want to work, they want to volunteer, internships, research, they need permits that are different than what a student normally gets into a country with. If they do it for 3 weeks, do we need to get a permit? Should we just tell them, if anyone stops you at customs, just say, I'm here as a student and I'm really looking forward to learning, versus I'm actually doing research on human subjects in a particular area? There's a dilemma there, because if we tell the students to tell the truth, they will probably get turned around at customs and sent home. If we tell them to lie, they'll probably be able to do what they want to do, and then no one will be the wiser if they get caught and we have told them to lie. There's bigger problems, but that's an issue. And so again, we have to make these decisions on a regular basis, and we talk to counsel over in the countries we're going to, and we have to sometimes decide which is the best, most effective route that isn't going to put anyone at risk, but also helps keep us true to what we think is the right thing to do. And then lastly, on this area, health and safety. We have 41 programs right now all over the world, and I think if you click on any of the, do a search on any of the countries where we send students, you'll find something going on in that country. That could be whether it's a natural disaster or political turmoil or anything. We have to discern what is the right level of communication to the students, to the program leaders, to the parents, and sometimes we have to make decisions that say, this doesn't rise to that level of communication, if you will, because this stuff happens in that location all the time. Well, certainly, if you consulted with a group of parents, perhaps, or other students, they may say, well, no, we really need to know about that. My children really need to know about what's happening. They need to have firm guidance and more clear guidance from Notre Dame. Well, we have to make those decisions. And we have to sometimes say, that doesn't, if we did that for everyone in every circumstance like this, we'd be doing 24/7 emails about ice on the sidewalks in London. It's something that you have to make decisions about, where there really isn't a clear-cut answer to say this is something that needs to be communicated from a health and safety perspective versus not. Because every situation, every country is different. In fact, we had a situation in Israel just a couple weeks ago where I read something on the news about some rockets that were fired, and I contacted our person in Israel and asked him what is happening there. And he said, I didn't know anything about this until you told me, because this stuff happens all the time. And in fact, it's a non-issue. The big issue is something else. So we said, okay, so even what we think is cut and dry here, people on the ground, I say, that's nothing that the students need to be worried about. It's the same guidance we give to them when they get here applies in this particular situation. Okay. The gateways, and I'm conscious of time. The gateways themselves are unique phenomena. So generally speaking, the gateways represent sort of physical presence that we have in, right now, 5 major locations around the world. So London, Dublin, Rome, Israel, and then we have an office space in Beijing that we're hoping to expand a bit more. But these are big, except for Beijing, big facilities. They are standalone operations. In London, we actually have a separate incorporated charity where we have to report every year to the UK Charity Commission and to the equivalent of the UK FASB, which is not much different than our own FASB. But they also have staff, and they have rules and regulations that they have to follow in the gateways that are separate from what we do. And one of the big areas of conflict, if you will, or ethical dilemma, relates to employee wages and benefits, and then also employee relations. We have standards here for benefits and wages for employees. We don't have standards for the employees overseas. We have salary ranges here that are relevant to the South Bend market and kind of give us a guideline in terms of what we want to pay individuals. And we also have benefits here. Well, a big benefit being something like, well, access to all the facilities here, the educational benefit for children and spouses of employees. We don't have any of that over in London and Rome and Dublin. And the question came up from one person overseas, can I get those benefits? Can I have the employee education benefit? And we didn't really have an answer because the business answer was, well, it's a different market and nobody in that country gives education benefits. But the question persisted in terms of the Notre Dame standards. Notre Dame, the way Notre Dame operates, these are Notre Dame employees. Do we need to consider that type of benefit for these employees? And it's an unresolved issue because our workforce overseas is growing, and it just as a matter of information, college costs overseas are also growing. So what used to be fairly affordable in places like England and Italy is now becoming more expensive. And so this is really something to consider in terms of just wages and benefits. How do we map in overseas employees to the standards that employees enjoy here? Employee relations. In the system right now, in the IT system, overseas employees they have a little moniker next to the name that says non-ND affiliates, and they can see that and they say, that makes me feel warm inside. I'm referred to as non-ND affiliate. But that's also a real consideration. Jonathan LaGrange went over to London a few years ago. He's our executive vice president, and he said, you are all Notre Dame employees. And one of them, a very bold person, said, well, it doesn't look like it when I go onto the screen. And so we took some action to make them feel more integrated in terms of employee surveys and just keeping them integrated with what's happening on campus. But it's a real challenge to take a set of standards that you apply to a sort of commuting workforce of 5,000 plus individuals and map it into a workforce of 20 or so in London and 15 in Rome and a few in Dublin and a couple in Israel. So it's a challenge, and it does bring some dilemmas on a fairly regular basis that we have to address. Vendor relations and procurement. The only thing I'll say about this is that we had to ship a pile of computer stuff from here. Actually, it was a crate that was put together at the old St. Joe High School. We had to get it to Rome, and somebody said, hey, if you send it through Naples, it's cheaper. And we found out why it was cheaper, because it got stuck in Naples customs, and it was difficult to extract it from Naples. And somebody said, just go over there and pay them. Just go over there and pay the guys at the port to get the stuff. That's how they do it. And we said, that sounds like bribery. Well, yeah, but that's how they do it. That's Naples. We don't know about Naples here in South Bend. Apparently everybody in Italy knows you don't ship to Naples. But that's the kind of, it seems minor, but we had to get that stuff. We had to get these pieces of computer equipment because we had to get the building ready. And so it was a real question. Ultimately, the crate was released. I don't think too many people asked too many questions as to how it was released, but we got the pieces. But it came up, and I think it was done legitimately because there was a holding company in Arizona that helped us out. But that's a question. Somebody just said it would be a lot easier if we just sent out with €500 and gave it to them and took the employee visas and permits. Same kind of situation that we see for the students in terms of just how long do I have to stay there before I actually have to tell anybody I'm there, and what kind of permits do I need, and how hard is it to get, how long does it take. Leaving next week, I never really thought about this. So those are similar issues as the students. And then lastly, taxes. I wish Jeff were here because I could talk to him about tax avoidance and tax evasion. 2 weeks ago, I was on a phone call with UK HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is the equivalent of the IRS in the UK. He was from their tax avoidance office, and he wanted to talk to me and a few of my colleagues about VAT. Has anyone heard of VAT, value-added tax? It's like a hyperactive sales tax, and it's associated with essentially all the goods and services we buy anywhere in Europe. He said, I'm with the tax avoidance office. That doesn't mean I think you're avoiding taxes, but I just want to ask a few questions. And that's a big component component of our expense structure in Europe is this 20%, 21% VAT on all of our purchases. So we have a responsibility to minimize our tax exposure, especially as it relates to VAT. And as Jeff mentioned yesterday, you do get into situations where you could cross the line between sort of a tax efficient strategy versus an illegal tax strategy. And there's a gray area between what it constitutes sort of evasion versus avoidance versus just tax efficiency. So we have these issues that we have to deal with on an ongoing basis, one with respect to transactional operations, and then also when we acquire property, we have tax considerations as to which entity is acquiring property, a U.S. entity versus the overseas entity. So a lot of complexities related to those elements of taxes. And one of the things that's problematic here is that we don't have too many resident VAT experts in South Bend. And so we typically have to consult with people overseas who also tell us, trust me, this is the way it always works. This is the way you should do it. In fact, I was somewhat related to these matters. I was with a lawyer last week, and we were talking about another location, and he said, in this country, laws, they're not really laws. This is a lawyer saying laws are not really laws. We said, is that how you want to operate a business? By saying, well, it's law, but it's not really law. And so even in that particular country, or in certain countries, you really do have a sense that if you are going to act as if laws are written in stone and they must be followed, you're never going to succeed in that country because nobody else does it. That's a real challenge for certainly somebody working from a perspective of South Bend. And it also causes conflict with people with whom we're working overseas because they say, why are you guys being so tough on us? Why are you insisting on letter of the law documentation or process? And we say, well, because that's how we do things here. Well, okay, then you're not going to get stuff done there. Okay. Internationalizing campus, just a couple of thoughts on this. We do a lot of marketing to get students to come here. Right now there's about 400 undergraduate international students on campus and about 700 graduate students. And we sell Notre Dame. We sell it as a place that international students should come and should feel welcome. And what sometimes happens is that the people who do the selling don't, if I can go back to my earlier slide, follow through and follow up, so that once the students get here, the Notre Dame infrastructure isn't ready for them in the sense of housing and meals and things like break period housing, just basic student services. And so that creates an issue for us because people who are involved in helping remedy the situations that the international students find themselves in are asking, why are we selling Notre Dame as something it isn't? We're not ready for, we can handle X number of international students on a case-by-case basis, but we can't handle X times 10. And so there's this real sense that we're being disingenuous, that we're not really providing what was promised to the students. And so we're taking steps. Notre Dame International is working with housing and food services in particular, but also financial aid, to really make sure that the students who are invited here as students, as scholars, have an experience that's similar to students who are coming here from anywhere in the United States. One real issue that might just kind of seem like common sense to you is that students who come to Notre Dame from, let's just say, somewhere in Asia, China, India, wherever, during Christmas break, many of them just can't go back home. It's too expensive. It doesn't work out in terms of getting back and forth in terms of the timing. The dorms here are closed. There's nothing open. And so we found out just, as we dug into it a little more, there's sort of a network of places in Chicago that all the international students who are here over break periods go to stay. These are not attractive housing options. And so we're looking for ways to keep some spaces open here on campus over those long break periods so that the students aren't forced to either make a choice between going to a relatively unsafe place in an urban area or having to spend a lot of money to go back home when they really can't afford it. So it's kind of and if you think about it all the way through the end, it makes sense that these issues would rise, but the more international students we're seeing, the more this issue comes up regularly. Faculty collaborations and exchanges. Again, this is more on an individual. Anyone see the movie Interstellar? Anyone knows what this is, this thing? And it's actually Interstellar. This is actually the Large Hadron Collider. It's the particle accelerator in Switzerland. And we have a lot of faculty who work individually or as groups on this project. So they're going back and forth to Switzerland all the time. The work permit issue is similar. How long are they there? Who's actually facilitating their permit? Sometimes the host organization will do that. But they are, in a lot of ways, invisible to the university here, in the sense that a faculty member can buy a plane ticket and charge their fund to pay for it, and then just go. And if the host organization is kind of supporting their administratively, we don't know they're even gone. There's nothing that tells us they're gone. So sometimes people look at each other and say, what do we do about this? What happens if something happens to the faculty member when they're overseas? Who's responsible? What type of benefits and other type of arrangements do they need to have secured when they're over there? What type of housing do they have? Because it's not a huge component of what we do now, there's a sense of out of sight, out of mind. As long as everything's fine, don't worry about it. But at some point, we're going to have a bit more structure around this and make sure that we have an awareness of where people are in the event that they need support, but also that we understand that we're not in violation, or that the faculty themselves are not at risk for being in violation of local laws, labor laws, or work laws. And then lastly, I'm really going to date myself here, and my kids will be embarrassed about this one. Institutional partnerships. So, does anyone know where this is from, what movie this is from? Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, my kids, this is 2015, my kids. Institutional partnerships. So, this is also kind of tricky because everybody wants something from somebody else when it comes to institutional partnerships. It's never we are on equal terms and we have a shared vision. We want to be with a particular school in Chile because they have a great program X, and we want to be associated with that. And a school in Belgium wants to be associated with us because they love us and they've heard nothing but great things about us. So there's a drive or desire to enter into these partnerships. And in some ways, they're fluff. They don't really mean much. And the MOUs, there are dozens. I could go out and sign an MOU right now with an institution just as, the joke about these MOUs is we agree to be friends. All right? And we agree to work to be friends and to continue to be friends. There's no substance behind it, but they're typically touted, and it's not just Notre Dame that does this, as real examples of institutional partnerships and how a university is engaging another university in advancing shared academic vision. And it's used in marketing materials. This is used as a way to say, look at how goal number 5 said, enhance our reputation by engaging external partners. But if there's no substance behind it, is it actually appropriate to use it as a basis to compel other people to do something? I think for the accountants as well, you represent something in a financial statement, people use that to make decisions. And I think it's the same with marketing materials. If you represent something in a marketing publication that says, we have a relationship with University X, Y, and Z, and someone says, well, what's the nature of that relationship? We say, well, we've agreed to be friends. And say, well, what else? Faculty exchanges? Departmental exchanges? No, not yet. No, student no, we're working on it. It falls apart. I think there's a real tension there, I'll say dilemma, but tension there as to whether or not you actually should be doing that stuff. If there's no substance behind the agreement, do you really want to put that in front of people to say, look at how connected we are? That was right after they signed an MOU and planted the apes, and then he rode off and found the Statue of Liberty. Everyone knows that scene. Maniacs. Okay. So, we also have a pretty significant operation here on campus, and these issues aren't uniquely related to Notre Dame International, but they are the same types they give rise to the same type of ethical dilemmas as in our international activities. Employee relations, we have a fairly large staff, about 25-ish people consider all of our operating units. Financial management reporting, we are responsible to the university for our budgets and for the manner in which we use our resources, both here and overseas. And one of the, getting back to the characteristic of proprietary knowledge, only a few people know exactly what happens financially overseas in terms of all the transactions, because they're not embedded in the university system. And so there's an ability to change the information, if you will, or to present it in a way that suits your needs. And that's when it comes to budget time, I think anyone who works with budgets here knows that's a real risk to say, am I giving those at the university all the information that they need to help them make decisions? And then lastly, travel and related activities. You can imagine Notre Dame International, we do a lot of travel. Sometimes when people go to really, I mean, it's pretty cool to go to London, to Rome, to Dublin, sometimes all in one trip, and we really have to make sure that we're good stewards of the resources. That means, it's kind of boring, but reasonable meal allocations, reasonable lodging, airfare that's not either excessive in terms of the class of travel or just the multiple changes or multiple stops along the way that add to the cost of a plane ticket. It's a big chunk of our budget. It's a big chunk of activity especially for the senior leadership, and there's a real risk that people can justify and say, I'm traveling for a week, I deserve a good meal. And that'll come back through an expense report and we'll say, this is not appropriate because we're not, we're charged with being stewards of the university resources. And yes, you're working hard, but that doesn't mean that you get a 200-pound meal at the restaurant with 5 bottles of wine for you and your friends. And it's happened. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's a risk that we have to be on the lookout for. Okay. So that's all I have. I'll take any 117. I'll take any questions or comments, except for anyone who I either studied in class with or worked with anyone I studied in class. That's most of the front. Second, and my kids, which is scattered throughout. Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible to get away with acting unethically once or twice, or do you think that it always catches up to you?
Well, I guess I would say you have to develop tolerance. And it gets back to the sort of risk assessment idea. You have to have an ethical tolerance because I don't think it's actually possible to be completely ethical all of the time to everyone's satisfaction. And so if you go through the steps of just consulting and making sure that the appropriate considerations are made, you may choose to do something. In the instance of the student visas and things are a pretty good example. We may say, it's okay to send somebody for 3 weeks and not have to go through all the rigmarole of getting a work visa, because by the time they're back, no one will be any worse off. So I think if you define your risk tolerance, I think it's possible to look within that, but I don't think it will catch up with you if you live within that sort of framework that you set, and that it's agreed upon within the organization.
Any advice? We have a lot of students who will go abroad this summer. Any advice for them? Any do's or don'ts? Not any horror stories or things?
I think going overseas is kind of, again, it's kind of like living off campus times 10, if you will, because you're in a different culture, but you really don't have a support. You won't necessarily have the same type of support network that you have on campus, where it's something relatively close and nearby. And so my general advice would be, which is what we advise students in we have student safety summits, where we talk about just cultural awareness and what is accepted and what's not accepted. These might not be necessarily ethical considerations, but they're just general sensitivities that students need to bring with them depending on where they go. Just fundamentally, if you're talking about ethics, it's this sense of I'm doing not necessarily what I'm required to do by law, but what I believe to be the right thing in a particular situation. So in that sense, for the students who are going abroad, just be aware of where you're going and try to understand as much beforehand, but also when you get there, just what is acceptable and what's appropriate in terms of just behavior. It's a broad answer, but I think that's a pretty decent guidance, generally speaking.
Questions? All right. Well, you hit accounting, international, ethics, and Porky Pig.
Yes.
That's right. So thank you.